The views and opinions expressed by guests on this podcast do not necessarily represent those of the podcast, its host, or sponsors. If you would like to discuss the murder in your family on this podcast, please be sure to visit themurderinmyfamily.com for more information. You can support this podcast by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. This episode may contain unsettling material or subject matter. Listener discretion is advised.
Thank you for joining me for episode 52 of The Murder in My Family. If you find that you enjoy this podcast, please take a minute to rate and review it wherever you listen to your podcast so that the show can continue to grow and reach new listeners. To learn more about the show or the cases we discuss, please visit themurderinmyfamily.com. You can also find us on Twitter with the handle @MurderInMyFam or by searching for the Murder in My Family podcast on Facebook. If you'd like to support this show through a Patreon donation, it's always appreciated. And you can do so by visiting patreon.com/themurderinmyfamily. Benefits of supporting the show on Patreon include early access to ad-free episodes of the show, plus bonus content not heard in regular episodes. Support may also include thank you cards, stickers, and more. If you prefer to, you can also support the show through a PayPal donation by visiting paypal.me/themurderinmyfamily. In each episode, I'll give shout-outs to any new supporters. In this episode, I'd like to thank Gina, Gigi, and thank you to all of the supporters that generously donate to help keep the show growing and improving. Being that it's a new year, I wanted to talk about one of the things I'm really excited about in 2020, and that's attending the CrimeCon convention in Orlando this May. I'll be on Podcast Row supporting my podcast, Criminology, 3 Men and a Mystery, and The Murder in My Family. I hope we'll see you there. And if you're thinking about going, be sure to use my promo code that will save you 10% off registration at crimecon.com. That promo code is Criminology2020. And again, that will save you 10% off a standard badge. And I hope to see you there this May. And one last note before we get started. Please consider supporting any of the sponsors that you hear on The Murder in My Family, the way that those sponsors support the show. It's with our sponsor support that this show can go on and continue to provide a platform to share these stories with you in every episode. Thank you, and now on with the show. When 21-year-old Pennsylvania native Ryan McCall lost his life on a Tampa, Florida street in 2009, a promising life was cut short in a senseless and random act of violence. His murder left a void in the lives of his family. Ryan was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what's most frightening of all is that any one of us could find ourselves in that same place. Ryan Patrick McCall was born in Pennsylvania on February 19, 1988, to Kevin and Joanne McCall, one of 3 children born to the couple. The family resided in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. From the time he was a child, Ryan always loved sports. He played football and ran track and cross country at St. Joseph Elementary School and then at Downingtown West High School. He also played for the Marsh Creek Eagles, a youth football club. Ryan was also a diehard Philadelphia sports fan. And unless you're one yourself, you probably wouldn't understand the highs and lows that being a Philly sports fan provides. But Ryan stuck with his teams through thick and thin. In 2006, Ryan graduated from Downingtown West High School and attended the University of Tampa in the fall. It was there that he majored in exercise science and was a member of the track team. He also found time to coach the track team at Tampa Prep School. To earn extra money, he worked in a grocery store. As busy as he was, Ryan still managed to keep a 3.6 grade point average. By all accounts, he was a good kid with a bright future ahead of him. On August 18, 2009, Ryan and his best friend, Michael Harahan, celebrated another friend's 21st birthday at a local bar called Retreat, located on Hyde Park Avenue in Tampa. The pair left for retreat at around 3 a.m. on the morning of August 19th to head back to Ryan's home. But neither one of the young men had enough money to call a taxi service, so they decided to make the trip on foot. As they were walking home, a stranger jumped out of the bushes near North Boulevard Bridge and demanded money. Ryan gave the man what little money he had left. Michael instinctively ran for help and heard a gunshot as he fled. He had no idea that the stranger shot Ryan once. The bullet that struck Ryan entered his arm, made its way into his torso, and pierced his heart. He died at the scene, alone in the dark. When Tampa police arrived, they found Ryan's body at the north foot of the bridge that arches over the Hillsborough River. The route Ryan and Michael were walking led to an area north of the university that was known for violent crimes at the time. It just so happened that during the attack, Michael was making a phone call when the man jumped out. A voicemail partially recorded the man's voice saying, "Get over here. Get the F over here." Police were provided with details of Ryan's killer. He was described as being an African-American man in his mid-20s to 30s, about 5'10", and weighing roughly 180 pounds with a husky build. He was wearing a white t-shirt, had short cropped hair, and possibly facial hair. As police searched for the gunman, they also took steps to notify Ryan's parents, who themselves had transplanted from Pennsylvania to live in Florida. Ryan's father, Kevin McCall, learned the news first while his wife was at work. He then anguished as he thought about how to share the heartbreaking news with his wife. He confronted Joanne at work and found a way to let her know that her son was dead. Understandably, this was the beginning of a long and painful road, mixed with tears, anger, and questions, and Ryan's parents would have to be patient as they waited for justice. News quickly spread of Ryan's senseless murder, and grief counselors were on hand to help students cope with the tragedy. Students began walking in groups for safety. Unfortunately, it would take 3 years before an arrest was made in Ryan's murder. That day finally came in May 2012. Tampa Police Detective Sal Argeri, who was in charge of the case, filed a warrant with the state attorney's office to arrest 21-year-old David Earl Williams, Jr. They didn't have to look far for Williams. He was already in prison. He had been a person of interest from day one. Williams had an extensive criminal record, starting at the age of 11, when he was accused of beating up and robbing a fellow student. By the time Ryan was murdered, Williams had been arrested 30 times. In 2007, Williams was driving a 1999 Nissan Altima when a Tampa police officer signaled for him to pull over. But Williams kept going and rammed his car into the police car. The chase finally ended when Williams rammed the Altima into a concrete barrier, and the car caught on fire. He was charged with aggravated assault for that incident. 6 months later, while serving time for the assault charge in a juvenile detention facility, he beat up an employee there. A judge ordered that Williams remain in the detention facility until his 19th birthday. He got out in July 2009, 5 months after he turned 19. He had only been free 27 days before he shot Ryan McCall. 11 days after Ryan's murder, Williams knocked 2 men to the ground and stole their wallets and cell phones. 2 days after that, he burglarized 2 homes in West Tampa. The following day, police arrested him, and he admitted to the robbery and burglaries. A few months later, he was sentenced to 15 years in prison. When investigators questioned Williams, he claimed that he was involved in attacking Ryan and Michael, but that an associate of his had pulled the trigger. Detectives didn't buy it, and Williams was arrested shortly after. It wasn't until 3 years after his arrest that his murder trial finally began in April 2015. The jury found Williams guilty of first-degree murder, and the judge immediately sentenced Williams to life without the possibility of parole. Williams is only mentioned in this episode as a footnote, an afterthought. He's mentioned because he's proof that some people deserve to be off the streets for good, so they can't hurt innocent people. A man with a record like his should never have been free to harm Ryan, or anyone else for that matter. The conviction and life sentence of the man that took their son's life has been bittersweet for the McCall family. While they'll never get their son back, the conviction has allowed them to finally move forward. They never let people forget Ryan either. They established a foundation called the Ryan P. McCall Foundation to carry out Ryan's vision of helping others and to give back to their community. In Ryan's memory, every year runners take part in an event called Ryan's Run in both Westchester, Pennsylvania and Tampa, Florida. The event serves to honor Ryan and keep his memory alive. 10 years after his son's murder, Kevin McCall wrote a book called For the Love of Family, How a Knock on the Door Changed Everything. The book is a collection of a father's thoughts, feelings, and experiences following his son's murder, and I can't recommend it enough. Kevin was kind enough to join me to discuss the book and his son Ryan. That conversation is coming up in just a moment. Hi, Kevin, and thanks for coming on to discuss your son Ryan's case with us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
If you would, can you tell us a little bit about Ryan and what kind of person he was?
Yeah, Ryan was the baby of the family. So he brought a great sense of humor along with him from the time he was able to start communicating. He was his bird was very loving and giving. You asked him to do anything, he would be right there for you. As he got older, he loved working with kids and trying to mentor. Giving some guidance, hoping that he was helping them, reach their potentials in life. As he always did himself. He always pushed himself as hard as he could to reach at least what he wanted to get to. His sense of humor was one of those where dinner time was always together. And, if it's a serious conversation in the middle of it, he would just say something and everybody would just stop and start laughing. And the conversation would be light and airy after that. That's the kind of young boy and then a young man that he was.
And a couple of the articles I read mentioned Ryan as being sort of an all-American kid. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I guess he was, someone who, worked hard, wanted to be the best person he could be every day, and he, made sure that the way he looked at life, that it was not as serious as as some people would take it, that he wanted to enjoy what he had.
One thing I read, too, was that Ryan was a big fan of Philadelphia sports teams. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we grew up in the Philadelphia area. We raised our family out in Downingtown, Pennsylvania. Originally, my wife and I were married and lived in Seacane and then eventually moved out to Downingtown. And, of course, Philadelphia, sports was big in our family growing up, and then I brought it into our family with our children. And he was a major rabid Eagle fan, loved the Phillies, but and the Flyers, but the Eagles were his passion. And every game, he wore the loss and the victory on his sleeves, and especially the loss, like we all did as Eagle fans, would take you all the way to Wednesday, and then Thursday you would turn around to go to the next Sunday, and he would be down and out. And tell you a crazy story about it. It was back when the Eagles were playing the Arizona Cardinals in a playoff game, and we were down, and I'm like, don't worry about it. We'll come back. And we almost came back and won. And he turned around to me, I hate you, Dad. I said, what do you mean? He said, you made me an Eagle fan, and they're always disappointing me. That's exactly. And I was like, okay. And then he stormed out of the house, and he had to blow some steam off, and It's, he he wore it so hard that it hurt him for a while.
And I think that's a little bit of an inside joke for those of us that live in the Philly area. I don't think most people will understand the frustration, the highs and lows of being an Eagles fan in this neck of the woods are.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Well, Ryan's path took him down to Florida to go to school. He was attending the University of Tampa. How long before Ryan was killed did he start attending school there, and did he enjoy going to college there?
Oh, he loved it. His brother, went to the same university, and he graduated and stayed down here, and then Ryan started. And in his he was going into his senior year, the August of his senior year when he was murdered. He just loved the university, the cross country track team. He just loved the camaraderie of everybody and how the university treated him. He really loved it.
What kind of courses was he taking?
He was working towards an allied health, which he really wanted to be a physical therapist eventually. He was looking into where he was going to go after he graduated to get his doctorate in physical therapy, and that was his passion to hopefully, help people. And I think he was working towards maybe getting into the kind of the sports end of it.
And you mentioned that he loved the school, didn't have any bad experiences. Had he ever voiced any concerns about living in that area, going to school in that area, having any kind of run-ins or altercations with anyone that caused him to be alarmed at all?
Not at all. Of course, university's in a big city, and there was never any real concerns. He lived on campus for the first 3 years. So going into his senior year, they decided to move off campus, which really wasn't maybe a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile from campus. And the neighborhood starts to change a little bit when you get down through there. But still, there was no real concerns. He just understood that hopefully, that you always be aware of your surroundings. He actually would talk to people about that because that's the way I taught him. Always be aware where you're at and your surroundings. And so I think he understood all that.
And it was August 19th, 2009 that Ryan was murdered. If you could, as far as you understand it, can you tell us sort of how that night unfolded for Ryan?
Yeah. I guess I'll start a little bit earlier in the day. My son Kevin was purchasing his first house, and we were moving him in, and Ryan was there with a few of his college friends helping Kevin move in. And it was probably about 5 o'clock-ish or so that Ryan and Kevin came back from getting, running down to Best Buy's, and they were coming back, and he looked at me and said, "Dad, do you need me anymore?" I said, "No, you can go. Be safe. You need any money?" "No, I'm good." And my son Kevin took him back to his house because they were having a birthday party for one of his roommates that night. So he got back. They were having the party. Some reason around 10:30 or so, they all decided to go down to a college bar down near the university. And at that point, no one was driving, so they were walking home, around 2:45 in the morning. And they were coming over the bridge, and at that point, that's when Ryan and his friend were approached by someone, telling them to, give them all their money, and from Ryan's friend was pistol whipped, said to Ryan, that we got to go. And after that, it was very quick. His friend started to run, and all he remembers is hearing a shot, thought Ryan was ahead of him because Ryan was a, pretty fast track guy and never looked back. and got to the house. And at that point, they realized Ryan wasn't with them. And at that point, they all called 911 and went back to the scene. And by that time, the police were there really very quickly. Within minutes, they were there. This was about 3 o'clock in the morning when this all came down. And from that point on, they all found out there that Ryan, they don't think they knew if he passed yet at that point, but eventually being around that for a while because the scene got really crazy. And as far as I know, they were told not to call us to make sure that we were notified through the right channels.
And this really seems like a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did they cooperate? Was there any indication that the person attacked them because they didn't cooperate, or did it happen so quickly that it's not even clear what happened?
And it happened within seconds. It was so quick that no one, as far as his friend, he was just like, the guy said something to them, and there was no reaction between the two of them other than he tried to just run his friend, and he thought Ryan was with him.
And it's sort of like the kind of random act of violence that I think any one of us could be in at any time, and I think that's one of the scary things about this case. You mentioned having to get the news through the right channels about what happened to Ryan. How did you find that out, and how soon did you find that out?
Well, Ryan was the crime came down around 3 o'clock in the morning. My wife was going to work around 5:30, and I was in my office working on some things for the day. And about 7:15, I had a loud knock on the door. I just kind of said, "Well, that's strange." And then it was really 2 hard knocks and then 2 rapid knocks. And at that point, I knew either something was wrong on the street, either a house next door, maybe there was a problem in there, or somebody was asking, there's an emergency, and they were asking me to, knocking on our door to ask us to either get out or something like that. So I got up out of the chair and walked down the hallway. And as I got to the door, they knocked again twice. And at that point, I just had a weird feeling in my stomach. And as I opened the door, I seen the 3 officers standing there. And the lieutenant asked me if I was Mr. Kevin McCall. And I told him yes. And at that point, I thought maybe it was my wife. Then it was about an hour and a half or so after she went to work. And he said, "Is your wife at home?" And at that point, I really got that lump in my throat that I knew it was one of my kids. And I asked him which one of my children was it. And his response was, "Can we come in, Mr. McCall?" And I just stood at the door. I don't know. It probably was seconds, but it felt like hours in a way. And he asked me quite a few times, and eventually I let them in the door, and we walked down the hall into my kitchen. And he stood there, and at that point, I thought maybe, most of the time you're thinking it's a car accident or an accident, something happened late, early morning. And he said, your son Ryan was murdered in a robbery attempt in Tampa early this morning. And it didn't click right away. It kind of wasn't sinking in. I'm still thinking car accident. And then within seconds of that, it started to really just hit home about what they were talking about. And I just asked them, who was he with, anybody? And they told me yes. And I asked him if his friend was okay, and they told me he was okay. And then I asked him where was Ryan shot, and they started to tell me the location, and I wasn't asking about the location where it was on his body. I was more concerned about, he was shot, and was he really dead? And at that point, the corporal asked me to, if at that point, can he call the detective, and can I talk to, and I could talk to him. So he picks up my cell phone, which it was kind of strange, and he dials his number with my cell phone. And the detective gets on the phone and says, Mr. McCall, this is Detective Salgier at the Tampa Police Department, and this is something I don't like to tell any father, but he proceeded to tell me what happened to Ryan. And at that point, he said, anytime you need me, please don't hesitate to call. And I said, okay. I put the phone down. The corporal looked at me and said, now you have his number. And at that point, the lieutenant, and, as I was standing there, the corporal most of the time was very close to me, next to me. So I guess I looked pretty unstable, even though I was trying to, be as strong as I needed to be, because I knew this day was going to be upside down completely. And they were very detailed on every question that I asked. They almost had an answer to. So, they were pretty good on what happened. So, and I was so surprised that they almost knew every question I was going to ask. And at that point, they just asked me, did they want me to go get my wife? And I said, no, I'll go get her. And they said, we really don't think you should drive. And at that point, I said, I know. I'll find somehow to get there, but I need to tell her. Well, we can take you. And I said, no, I don't think that's a good idea. The police go into her place of business. And the lieutenant said, well, once we walk out this door, it's going to be all over the news. And I really think you should get there as quickly as you can. And I walked him down the hallway and closed the door. And I knew at that point, normal was all over for us.
So you're left with this bombshell, that the news that no parent wants to hear, and now you're forced to have to break this same news to your wife. Was that just as difficult, having to share that with your wife, as it was hearing it yourself?
I think it was much more difficult, but I knew it had to come from me. Because as soon as they left, I had to call my daughter and my son, and at that, and that was really hard to do, knowing the kind of response I would probably be getting. So once I contacted them, I got myself changed. A neighbor came down. They knew something happened because it was all over the news that morning, and I didn't know it. I usually watch the news from start to finish, but they didn't know who it was until they seen the 3 cop cars down the street. So they quickly came down, asked me, was it Ryan? And what do you need? And I said, I need a ride to go get you in. So he drives me down, and I'm trying to dial family members before he finds out. No one's answering. Of course, it's fairly early in the morning. And I get to a place of business, and I go in, and I'm just kind of moseying around, trying to figure out, how am I going to do this? Get her out. I didn't want to tell her the place of business. I wanted to get her out of the store. So I told her, can you get your manager? I'm having chest pains. I called the doctor, and he told me to get to the hospital as soon as I can, and I wanted you to go. So Jim brought me here. And I kind of feel she didn't really believe that, but she just looked at me and said, why? I said, just get your manager. So she called on her manager, and I grabbed one of her coworkers and whispered, I said, can you please just go tell the manager to get her out of here? The worst thing just happened to us. And, the worst thing that could ever happen to a parent just happened this morning. And the woman went and got the manager and told you, wait, go home. Go with your husband. He needs you right now. Just go with him. And I walked her out to my neighbor's car. I got her in, and she was like, who is it? What is it? What is it? What's going on? You're not sick. And she knew, and I just looked at her. I didn't know what to say. Yeah. She just looked at me and said,
I assume there's just no words that you can say.
No, she just looked at me and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, something happened to Ryan. What happened? Was he in a car accident? Is he okay?" And I just shook my head. And she kept saying, "Is he okay?" And I just shook my head, and then finally I just blurted it out, and I just said he was murdered and he's dead. And of course she said, "I don't believe you. Why are you telling me something like this?" And I just said, "We got to get home." And we got in the car, and she never said much after that. She just wanted to know a little bit where it was and how it happened, and then she just started shutting down.
So your family's forced to deal with this devastating news, and did you was your first thought, "I need to go there. I need to see what's going on"?
Yeah, probably it would have been if I seen it on the news, because I probably would have connected the dots because his friends were all over the news, and so I would have knew who it was. But being that I didn't see it, and after I was told the news, my whole focus was on my wife and my daughter Kimberly and my son Kevin.
So you just wanted to make sure they were all okay and try and keep them as together as possible.
Yeah. I knew that this just the first day was going to be mostly shock and disbelief, and tons of media I knew would start coming. So I was hoping to make sure we got ourselves somewhat together and to keep some kind of poise about us as a family.
One thing I wanted to know, you're left to deal with this as a family. Meanwhile, the police have to start this investigation trying to catch the person that did this to Ryan. Did they have any immediate leads or suspects right away? How quickly did that investigation start going?
They didn't have anything real quick right away. A few weeks after, they had some ideas who it could be. Not just one person. They had a few people of interest that they were following through that neighborhood that they either wanted to talk to or needed to get some information one way or another. And so they really worked through a gambit of persons of interest, and he was one of them. But doing the best police work that they could do, it wasn't quickly done.
It took months, in fact, several months to get an arrest. How many months total before someone was arrested?
33 months.
Yeah, almost 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
During that time, did you try and hold out hope that someone's going to be caught and punished for this, or did there ever seem like days where it seemed hopeless, like you were never going to find out who did this?
Yeah, there were days that you felt like that, but the detective kept me abreast pretty much, every week or weekly, monthly, on what was going on, if there was any kind of change. So because of that, him constantly being in contact with me and letting me know where they were, who they were looking at, what they were looking for, and that kept not I guess hope, but mostly my focus on myself at that point, which was that they are working really hard, and that gave me relief knowing that no matter what Ryan's case, how long it's going, they're not going to stop.
So it never felt to you like it was just like a case that they put on a shelf that was collecting dust. You knew they were actively investigating it.
Yes, completely they were. And I knew early on that just let them do their job. I tried not to intervene, make any suggestions. I don't know their job, and I knew if I would just let them do their job, that it would come back one way or the other, that they found somebody or they didn't, or what they're working on, and that's exactly what happened.
And when they arrested the person that did this, a man named David Earl Williams Jr., and you found out more about him as far as having a checkered past, did it make you angry that someone like him was out there running around committing these kind of crimes, especially since they had a history of other crimes?
I wouldn't say angry. I was disappointed in one way that he was able to continue to do those things. That he was able to go in and out of the system, and be able to get back out on the street and do certain things, and because he was released fairly, 3 to 4 weeks before Ryan was murdered on another crime that he did back a few years before that. So I was never angry about it. It was just, I guess, as I just said, more disappointed in where it was.
It seems frustrating in so many of these cases that we see in the news, and that people that sometimes do these kind of things, you find out that they've done other serious crimes or violent crimes before, and it sometimes makes me wonder, at least, how are they out on the street to do this when they should probably be in jail for some of the other stuff they've done?
Yeah, I felt that way, but I started to understand a little bit that the justice system is what it is, and it's something that we all have to be able to live with. We have no control over what they do, and how the justice system works. It works pretty good, and sometimes these things happen, which doesn't mean that no one has any control. It's really just what the system, gives to whoever the offenders are. And we just happen to be one of those recipients of a continual offender that, ended up himself destroying his own life at the same time.
And well, he was convicted of Ryan's murder and sentenced to a mandatory life sentence. Did you attend the trial, and how hard was that for you?
Yeah, my whole family attended the trial. I was at every hearing over the 3 years before the trial came. So when we got to the trial, I think by being able to be at every hearing and having our victim advocate with us, and then guiding my wife and I through, each hearing, that and actually preparing us as much as they could for the hearing, I think it helped. But once you get in that courtroom and it starts, a lot of that starts to change. And it's more that you start becoming very attentive on what's going on in the room, how the jurors might be listening, and how the prosecution's presenting their case. You're really zoned in on all of it, that you feel like you're the only one sitting in that room, and you don't react much. You just kind of sit there and try to take it all in, and hope for the best for the justice system at that point. Because I started to prepare myself early on that once Ryan was murdered, that was us that were dealing with that pain. And after that, it was the law enforcement, and then after that, it was the justice system and the prosecution. We had no control over any of that. So whatever happened at the trial, we're still the same people when we leave. We still have that loss when we went home. So I think through the trial was more that you hope for the best for justice to prevail.
Did Ryan's killer ever show any kind of remorse or take any kind of responsibility as far as you saw?
None at all. When the verdict was read, there was not a reaction, nothing.
And again, this is somebody that's been through the system, been through, prison, and had maybe, I don't know, I can't speak for him, but maybe had been used to it and was desensitized. And that's unfortunate to not at least show any kind of remorse. Did you get to give any kind of victim's statement or impact statement for your family?
Yes, I was able to give one, and anybody could, and I gave one, and a few other people did. And mine was more not even directed at him; it was more directed at what happened to our family and where we had to go from here.
So it seems almost as if now that he was going to be punished, you wanted to not focus on him, not give him the attention, but turn the focus back to your family and figure out how to go forward.
Yes, it's exactly what I was hoping to do. Knowing that our family was still going to grow, and hopefully joy and happiness will start to come back, even though you still carry that pain and that mourning and everything with you. But if we didn't start to try and heal, I guess you could use as a word, the wounds, at least that they don't hurt as much. That was my focus.
And it's been a decade now since Ryan's murder, and not to say you'll have closure, because I don't think there's any real thing as closure. Your son can't come back to you. But in that time, in that 10 years since you lost him, have you been able to move forward and start, as you mentioned, experiencing some of those other things in life to try and not maybe normalize things as much as possible for you?
Oh yeah, completely. As I wrote in all my journals, you don't think you're moving ahead at times, and because you're always stuck in certain areas of the grief and depression and the pain. And my daughter got married. I knew at that point that things were going to start to change completely, and it start bringing us joy and happiness back to our family. And the love and the caring that we had for each other was always there. But her getting married was the one that started it all. And then having our first grandchild, of course, and just that point, you could see all of us just, the smiles and the laughter became more real and not that fake sometimes that you did just because you were around people and you wanted to make sure that they didn't think that you were completely, grieving completely all the time, even though you were. And then my second grandchild, and then my son Kevin getting married recently in the last couple of years. If you don't let family move and grab onto it, you can let it go. And we all grabbed onto it, and it's special even more now because Ryan came with us at each venture that has come about in the last 10 years.
So he's still part of you. He's still there, even though he's not physically there.
Yes, he was part of each wedding. My two children honored him in the way that they wanted to honor him at their weddings, and my daughter, gave her first child Mason Ryan's name for his second name, so his name's Mason Ryan. So it's there, and I couldn't be more happier about where our life is now.
Well, and You mentioned that you had started writing some journals, and that led to a book for the love of family. Can you talk a little bit about that? How that unfolded and how that's helped you in writing that?
I started journalizing almost from, I wouldn't say journalizing in the beginning. It was just more information the morning of it when they were giving me tons of information. So I started writing things down and, make sure that I didn't forget things. And then I started to, think about, okay, how am I going to keep all this stuff together? And I would just start writing. And then one day it was probably late September after Ryan died in 2009, that we were at a victim advocate counselor. And she suggested that my wife and I, why don't you guys just, start writing, maybe just write on a piece of paper certain things. And I've never thought I would ever be the one to start doing that. I thought it would be my wife. So I started to sit in the morning and, you're going through some things and stories about Ryan and, we're looking at the case and things are, and I just started writing on paper and saving them all and folding them up, putting this little booklet that I started writing the information about what I needed to do the morning of Ryan's murder. And then about a month or so in, my wife comes back from the dollar store and says, I think this would be cheaper to put these in journals and not write in pieces of paper. I said, okay. And the first journal was probably capsulized most of 1 year. And then the second journal started to be almost daily. And I ended up, writing 6 journals that encapsulated the whole 6 years from the time Ryan was murdered through the trial. And I joked about it once. Well, I should write a book. And a few people suggested, why don't you? And I said, well, if I do this, I want to be the way I want it, and as journals, and want it written in the real time. I don't want to have this as a memory. I want people to be able to read it and see each day the progression that I go through. And I believe people that have gone through this, some of this they go through themselves. So I wanted to make sure it was in real time. So talking to a few people and friends, I found someone to help me clean up the journals, if you could say, because when you're journalizing, there's misspellings and there's no punctuation. So at that point, that's how it all got started.
So it's a collection of sort of real time experiences that you put to paper, so to speak.
Yes, it's my exact journals. So it'll be January 10th at 6:30 a.m.
Wow. I think that would give people a really good bird's eye view of sort of what someone that's been through what you've been through, how it affected you, and how you dealt with it in writing those things. And where can people find that book?
You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, iBooks, For the Love of Family, How a Knock at the Door Changed Everything. And also, you can go to our foundation's website, ryanpmccall.com, and there'll be links there. It'll take you right to all those.
Well, we'll definitely put those links in the show so people can find that. I think that'd be very, very good reading and stuff for people to read. And just a final question, being 10 years since Ryan's murder, looking back, what would you like to see, or what do you think that Ryan's legacy is or should be?
I think the legacy of Ryan himself is that he was a loving, caring person, wanted to do what he could for others, and that's what our foundation's based on. Is his love for life is what I think I want everybody to remember, that he had a true love of life. he didn't let things bother him as much and let him roll off his sleeve, other than the Philadelphia Eagles. But yeah, but I think that's the most thing, his love of life.
And it sounds, just from talking with you, it sounds like he may have gotten a big part of that from you.
Yeah, I guess so.
I can't thank you enough, Kevin, for coming on to talk about your experience in Ryan's story. I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us.
Oh, thank you for taking the time to talk about the story in my book, and hopefully you can reach out to people and read it, and and maybe give them somewhat of a view on what happens to a family when this happens. Because I always tell people, I never want you to try to understand, just be understanding.
Thank you once again for joining me for this episode of The Murder of My Family. Thanks goes out to Debbie Buck at TrueCrimeDiva.com for writing and research assistance in this episode. If you enjoyed this episode, please introduce a friend of the podcast and invite them to listen. As we wrap up, I'd like to invite you to listen to a preview of a true crime podcast that I think you'll really enjoy. It's called Direct Appeal. Be sure to give it a listen. And before you go, remember that every murder victim means something to somebody.
On April 23rd, 2007, I was convicted of the murder and dismemberment of my husband.
On Direct Appeal, we examine the murder conviction of Melanie McGuire following a highly publicized trial. Looking at the evidence that was presented and the evidence that may have seemed insignificant at the time, we form our own conclusion about Melanie's guilt.
I know when I should have left.
She would never do this, but I think she knows something.
Am I telling them I'm having an affair? Nobody's asking. He owed money out on the street, and that's how you get shot here and here.
It's unlikely that her pistol was used in this crime.
It's not about who's innocent or guilty. It's about a notch in your belt.
Searches that include how to kill your wife, how to poison your wife.
They had bags that contained victims' parts.
The prosecutor is fierce. You will be taking the stand, literally live on court TV. I expected the worst, and what I got was one step shy of the worst.
To listen to Direct Appeal, please download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.